Welcome to Lead Like a Boss, everybody. Man, have I got a great guest today. Brianna, thank you so much for being on. Brianna has an immense amount of experience, but get this, as a female leader in the military. So we're going to hear a lot about how that has shaped her perception of leadership and some of the ideas she has about improving leadership. Brianna, let's dive into it. How did you go from being in the, well, first of all, why did you get into the military?
That's a great question. So growing up, I was the only child of a single mom,
Okay.
and my mom was a teacher. So, things were sometimes a little tight in the house. As I got older, I realized, hey, there's not necessarily a lot of money for college. So I got to figure out how to make that work. And, I was really smart, had really good grades. I wouldn't say I'm overly athletic, so those kind of scholarships probably not in the cards for me. I'm not that skilled, unfortunately, in
So
those
service
areas.
became a good option for you.
Yeah, so service became a great option. And what was funny is I think, doorways sometimes just open for you and you don't necessarily realize that what they are at the time. But we moved right before I started high school. We moved to a small town just south of Dallas, Texas. And our student career counselor, her older son was a senior, and he was working his acceptance to the Naval Academy.
Oh, okay.
There was also a sophomore that she was massaging to go to the Naval Academy. So I then became the freshman that she was able to massage
Oh,
to
yeah,
get
like
to
a
go to the Naval
trifecta.
Academy. We did. Out of 3 out of the 4 years in that particular span at my high school, she got Naval Academy folks out of, and so that kind of put me on my path there. That college was free. I knew I'd get out with a job, and if I decided to marry and fall in love with a starving artist, my family would always be taken care of. So it worked out well.
Cool, I love it. All right, so brothers, sisters, I'm wondering, did you have a lot of brothers that were made you toughened you up to be? No?
Nope,
No?
only child.
Oh boy. Wow.
We did
Okay.
move a lot. I think my mom was a bit of a nomad, so I probably was used to a military life, even though we weren't military, because we moved every couple of years.
Okay, I get it. All right, so you're in the military. You obviously got into it at a fairly young age. You stayed in it. What did you experience in the military that kind of evolved into where you are now and being focused on leadership?
Well, I think the premise behind the education at the Naval Academy is really bounded in developing leaders, right?
Okay.
And so that was kind of a start there, and that was something I've always been really passionate about. I've always been, I think, a bit of a natural leader in groups. Once I get to know people and I'm comfortable. um, but watching the development of others, helping others develop, I think is where I found my most internal
Your
satisfaction.
calling?
Yeah, my calling. I really, really enjoyed helping others find their success. And so, in the military, you bounce around from location to location, job to job. And so you're always getting to integrate with new people and
Yeah.
new teams, and kind of look at them, analyze them. My background was mechanical engineering, right? So I would take everything apart,
Heavily
put it back together.
male-dominated environment. Wow. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
So take everything apart, put it back together, and figure out, where the problems were, and help those, help everybody find solutions, help the team find solutions. And so that was something that I think has really inspired me to continue as a leader. However, as I've gotten more and more senior, I feel like I sometimes see less and less examples of great leadership.
Okay, well, we'll get into that. So, we know what we've seen in the press, and I know the press exaggerates and inflates every story. We all know that. But there must be some truth and we see it in the corporate world as well. That there are sets of understandings. The way it's certain types of leaders that don't adapt well with the times. I mean, things are different. It's not the same as it was in the 30s and the 40s and 50s. Things have changed, and a lot of these leaders haven't adapted to those changes. So I'm sure you've seen plenty of that, growing up, coming up in the military as a woman. Has it changed? Is it getting better? Like, what's the state of affairs?
I think it's definitely getting better, but it's very much a long game.
Okay.
It is not the kind of thing that happens overnight, because you're talking about changing a culture that is bounded in history, society,
tradition.
stereotypes, tradition, right? And so there's a lot of, I guess, angst to give some of that up. Even they don't understand that you can give up unhealthy things and keep healthy things, right? It's just a fear that you're just going to give up everything. And so that loss, that sense of loss, I think prevents some of the momentum from achieving more than we have to date. We've done a really great job at tackling policy.
Okay.
I think when you look at the structure and the framework of the federal government, and the military in particular, at least from what I've seen in the Navy, they've done a really good job ensuring that we have equitable policy.
Okay.
And not just, from a race stance.
So you're saying that the rules have been built, and you believe that the rules, the way they're written, are good or getting better. But yeah. I hear a but coming.
Yeah. I think the rules are getting a lot better. Most of the major kind of systemic issues that people face, I think most of them have been corrected. But there's always that pull. Well, this is the way we've always done it. Right. And so now you have to change the biases, change the conditioning that all of these leaders before you have grown up under. Yeah. And as I look from where I sit to kind of the next group, the next young folks coming in, they have much less bias and negative conditioning than I did. Right. And then, obviously than my superiors have. So I think it's trending in the right direction. But it's one of those things, like it's the big elephant, and to eat it, you have to do it one bite at a time, right? So we're just continuing to take nibbles.
Well, I mean, we see this in the corporate world, right? I mean, consultants is brought in, they do the mission, vision, values exercise, and everyone's all pumped up, and they put the big plaque on the wall, or they change the website or whatever. But then 2, 3, 4 months later, things just kind of start sliding back to the old habits, right? The old way of doing things. And we see it all the time. And I can't imagine it's any different in any institution. Military, we see it in hospitals, we see it in government, we see it everywhere. So what have you found have been some of the ways in which you can take these old institutions with their, maybe archaic ideas and turn them around? How do we do that?
I think the biggest thing is just to not let the dialogue die. Right. Yeah. I see big initiatives, just kind of like you were talking about, pretty much annually come out from the senior service leadership. I think 2 years ago, it was we're going to have hard conversations, and they all got on, Zoom and MS Teams, and I was actually surprised by how honest some people were, and how willing to share their stories of, diversity and prejudice. But what I was disappointed in was, after that, there was nothing. There was silence, right? None of those conversations were taken and put into any sort of like action plan of how to improve. And I think a lot of it is because we don't know how to improve. When you look at a lot of the training that comes out for, diversity, equity, inclusion, it's all about how to file a complaint after something bad has happened.
Yeah, right.
Right.
A lot,
So
a
there's
lot
no
of help that,
proactive
lot of help
training.
that does, right?
Right. There's no like proactive look at how do you solve it at the crux? Like how do you solve it at the initiation, to prevent having a complaint? It's all very reactive, and I think that's where, if organizations can just in little things like little daily meetings, find those little moments to be proactive in a meeting. If you've got a team member who doesn't speak up as often, asking them for their input, right? And I mean, don't make people uncomfortable, put them on the spot,
Don't
right?
bully them into inclusion.
Right. Like don't bully them. But and maybe prep them before, like, hey, I really think your ideas about this thing are great. In the meeting, I'm gonna ask you, I really want you to share your perspective, please, with the team. It helps us grow. But little
Okay, so
things like
here
that.
let's dive a little bit deeper into some of this.
Yeah.
As coaches, we know that metrics are important, right? Being able to measure progress, and of course, with that comes accountability. That's easier to do in a production environment. It's easier to do in a sales environment. Even in hospitals, it's not so hard. You get patient outcomes improve. It's in the military. That becomes a much more difficult thing to manage, I would imagine.
I don't think so. I think we just think it is.
Oh yeah, okay. So how do you measure inclusion, or how do you measure that? Oh, our micro acts of violence or prejudice are going down. How do we measure that?
Well, the military does what they call a DEOC survey,
Okay.
at every unit, and that's essentially a command climate culture kind of survey. And now, what I'll say is, I think most of the questions historically have been, does somebody, ask you for a sexual favor, or does somebody, touch you inappropriately to allow you to have a job, right? And so I would say most of that's the big stuff, that's the policy. We've kind of gone past most of that. I mean, there's always
Yeah,
going to
that's
be the random,
horrible. That's like horrible.
the horrible things, right? I think most people don't act that way, right?
Thank
and
God.
so and so it's a little bit comical, but then yet you still see we have issues, right? And there's still assaults, and there's still all of these things. And so how do you find that? I think you got to have questions that are based in value, and getting feedback from people of, do they feel valued? Do they feel like their
Supported.
input is desired? Do
Yeah.
they feel like their input is heard? Are they sought out for their unique perspective, or is groupthink running everything?
Yeah.
And I think it's easy in the military to say, well, groupthink has to run everything because we have a hierarchy, and there's chain of command, and whatever the leader says, you have to
Yeah.
follow.
Yeah,
And
it's hard to have an insultant in the military, right?
yeah,
We like to put insultants in teams because they challenge the status quo, right? And they force people to see things from a different perspective. But in the military, obviously, that's not necessarily something that fits into the chain of command, and that whole culture. But okay, so there's that. But now I'm thinking, okay, so your commanding officer orders you to do A, B, or C, and A, B, or C, like they're all bad. Like they're all things that you would consider to be poor leadership, bad for morale, bad for, hey, could maybe even get somebody in jail. What does an enlisted person do under those circumstances?
well, so that we do have the one caveat in the military that says, if the order is illegal or unethical, you don't have to follow it.
Yeah, that's the law. That's the letter
That's
of
the
the
law.
law. But we know, like, that doesn't always happen.
Right. And so the biggest thing I think that people have to do, and it's not probably the happiest thing that anybody wants to do, but is you have to give feedback. You have to counter that in the moment, and typically follow that up with something in writing to show that no, I said we shouldn't do this, and I was overruled, and I'm not, allowed to do anything else. I mean, there's plenty of avenues internal to the military. There's the inspector general, there's the whistleblower hotlines. There's plenty of places
Yeah,
for people to go when something really
that's something
bad.
that I think the corporate world is still lagging quite a bit behind. Obviously, the large multinational corporations, they have all that stuff for legal and insurance reasons and things like that, big unions. But I'm talking about, smaller down on the corporate scale. I think smaller corporations don't believe it's necessary. And I do think that there needs to be more of that. It's not hard to do. And I think more of that needs to be done, because I think I think that younger people are getting more and more averse to confrontation. Like it's harder for them to face confrontation. I'm not quite sure why, but we're seeing that. And I think having something that's anonymous that people can go to that would help them to deal with these issues, I think is something that we see more of in the corporate world.
That's really interesting that's the perspective in the corporate world. I would argue on the military side, we're actually seeing a lot of the opposite.
Really?
People are not just blindly following orders anymore.
Okay.
There's so much more information available that everything is questioned. And I think that's something that the military is struggling with. And the way that they're struggling with it is they're often less directive, right? So
Okay.
less decisions are actually being made. There's a
Oh,
lot more of observation of the problem set than actually like dictatorial leadership. And
but are
there's
things getting
good and
done?
bad, huh?
But are things getting done?
Things get at the basic level, things get done, right?
Okay.
Because everybody, you have kind of the processes and you're following them, right? And those are kind of set. But when it comes to controversial types of things, the decisions are a lot slower to come forth.
Okay. It's like, it sounds to me like I'm not moving first. No, you move first. No, you move first. That's what I'm getting from that. Okay. All right. Excellent. Okay. So how far have you, like, how far along in the military are you? Like, what's your rank?
So I am an 05. I'm a commander in the Navy, which is the same as like a lieutenant colonel in the Army or Air Force.
So how many, I'm going to say employees, how many service people do you oversee?
So right now in my current position, I've only got one direct military that works for me. I work with others indirectly, but my current job, I'm kind of at a customer unit, looking at facilities and infrastructure. And so more of my staff is, I've got a team of about 13 senior civilians, federal civilian employees that direct report under me. But in my previous tour, we had about 700 troops in our unit.
That's what I was driving at, because I knew there was a number there, that meaningful number. So when we hear you speak, I wanted that to come up because I wanted the listeners to understand that this is real world issues. I mean, you have 700 people, you pretty much have everything under the sun in that 700 people, because it's not just those 700 servicemen and women, it's their families, it's their classmates, it's an ecosystem, right? And they're all connected. And so the problems that happen, the issues that happen to everybody, right? And it falls on the leader to understand those things to the best of their ability and to manage them, right?
Yes.
From a human perspective.
Yeah, they permeate everywhere. And if you think at the core of what is the military there, I mean, we're in the business of war, right? And obviously we hope
Or
that the
peace,
politicians figure out how
or
to
keeping
avoid
the
it,
peace. I
right?
like to think.
We hope we hope the politicians and the economists help us avoid it.
Yeah,
but
yeah,
but our job is to be ready in the event that it's necessary. And
yeah.
so when you take 700 lives and families affiliated and communities that they're a part of,
Oh yeah,
and you are trying to prepare them for that potential future, right? That's your job as a leader. You're trying to prepare them for that. And so it's really important to be as honest and real about the risks and the challenges as possible, because
yeah.
these are young kids that, you know, could in obviously worst case scenarios, right, could not come back home.
Yeah, you have to a degree their lives in your hands. It's not like a CEO has maybe a bad quarterly report. I mean, this is not the same thing.
Right.
Not the same thing.
And you have to build in them the trust. You have to inspire them with your leadership to ensure that they will be safe, that you're smart, that you're smart and you know what you need to do, but that they trust and are inspired enough by you to follow you with what you say. That hierarchical, like dictatorial leadership, are they going to actually follow you? Do they respect you? And I think nowadays, with the changes in social media and things like that, it's a lot harder to
Yeah,
earn that trust if you're not being an engaged leader.
yeah. You can't fake it. You
Right.
can't. It's not.
No,
It's you can't maintain the fake. It's just not possible.
they're smart. These kids are smart today. They are so much smarter than we were growing up, because we didn't have the internet when we were growing up, right? We only had the encyclopedia.
Yeah, they went to daycare learning about emotional intelligence.
Right, exactly.
I get it. I get it. Okay, so you've been in the military. You're changing people's lives. You're helping to guide policy and the practical implementation of those policies, right? Not policy for the sake of just having something nice, on the website, right? Now, what's next? What's the next steps? Because I know that you're not happy just doing that. I know you've got big plans.
Yeah, I think what's next for me is, as I, get closer and closer to my potential retirement eligibility, it's looking at where can I have the most impact. I think it's wonderful and very rewarding to be in small unit leadership.
Okay.
It's you really have a lot of direct exchange with the people that you're serving as a leader,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because that's really what you do as a leader. You serve others. But I'm hoping to expand on that and expand outward to have a greater impact than just the very limited capacity within the military. I got to do a 1-year exchange tour with a large architect and engineering firm based out of
Okay.
Denver.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got a little bit of exposure to, kind of corporate side. And kind of what I learned is
I'm
the
very
grass is
curious
not
to know what
greener.
that was like.
The grass is not greener. We both have some brown spots and some yellow spots and some green spots. um, and so, the things that I do within the military, the things that I have developed, the skills, the lessons I've learned, the stories that I have, are all things that can translate to help even a much larger audience than just, our small percentage of the populace. And so, with that, I have a kind of a consulting business that I've started on the side to start branching out in that direction, because really what drives me is making impact, making change for the better. And that's what I'm hoping to do.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of lessons that have translated well from the military to corporate life. I mean, there have been a lot of good programs that have come out of it. Like I think I'm thinking of Jocko Willink. He's done some good work, and there's others. And I think the ethic and the ethos is something that really works well in the corporate world. But I think what you've faced and what you've learned in terms of the diversity and inclusion issue, especially as a woman working her way up in the ranks, I think that's something that we need more of in the corporate world. And of course, it's not just it's not just the fact that you're a woman, because there are lots of different challenges out there. It's not just male to female sexuality. There's lots of different types of elements to the inclusion diaspora, right? It's race, it's gender, it's cultural background, it's educational bias. There's a lot of elements in there that most people don't think about. The first thing they think about is sexual harassment. It always just goes right to sexual harassment, but there's a lot of other elements to it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And what people don't realize is all of those elements, your exposure through your life, the community you grew up in, the church you went to, the schools you went to, who you were friends with, who you're friends with now, what company you work for, the diversity of that company, all of that conditions you, right? And it's unconscious, it's unconscious conditioning, but it can put you in ruts, right? So that when you react in a certain situation, you're not necessarily consciously choosing to react in a certain way. That's your natural flow.
But you've been conditioned, right? I mean, people don't understand that your environment conditions you. I mean, people like to say, oh, your development, basically happens between 0 and 6 years old, right? And okay, yeah, maybe your core base psychology gets built then, but what you deal with on a day-to-day basis is what shapes you now. It's what's causing you to react one way or the other now. And that's powerful. And I don't think people understand it well enough.
They don't, but the best part of it, George, the best part is you can change it.
Yeah.
You can change it. You can expose yourself to new experiences. You can expose yourself to new stimulus. And if you do it regularly enough, you can change those unconscious biases. You can change those unconscious reactions, and you can grow. You can grow as a human being, right? And I think it gets scary because a lot of people get kind of defensive, right? They feel like they're backed into a corner, or they feel like they're being judged. And so if you can approach it from no, this is just, everybody needs growth. We all, unconscious bias, everybody, we all have it. None of us are unconscious.
And it goes up and down. Right? It goes up and down. Like, we looked at those studies, after 9/11, and, people who may or may not have had an opinion about, folks from the Middle East, all of a sudden, their temperatures went way up, and so things will affect your temperature, if you will. So we talked about microaggressions, and we talked about, the issues and how, there's almost like a reverse bias happening, right? Like, it's like the old white guy is like under attack, if you know what I mean. He's the bad guy. How do we deal with that? Like, because that must be real too.
It's absolutely real. And I'll say, as a mom, and I have 4 blonde-haired, blue-eyed, white little boys, right? Those are my children.
Maybe a boy band, maybe.
Well, we were stationed in the Middle East, and it's 100 degrees every day. So one day all their hair had gotten really long, so I just shaved them all, shaved all just gave them a buzz cut, and we were walking through the base, and I looked back, and they had managed to all get in a little line, like little ducklings walking behind me. And the image that came to my mind looking back at my children and being in the Middle East was, these look like little Aryan German Nazi troops, and oh my God, I'm never going to shave their heads again.
I was so embarrassed.
Right? No, I was so embarrassed. I was like, how culturally insensitive of me. Like, why did I do that? But I didn't think about it until I saw them standing there kind of walking in a perfect line together. And so I fear of how people will judge them for what they look like, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
When you try to have direct conversations about gender issues, for example, I was in a meeting. I was the only female in the room. We were all senior directors of our programs giving updates to essentially the commanding officer.
Okay.
And as he goes around the room asking for updates, after I gave mine, he turned to my deputy.
Okay.
Who was male, enlisted, uh, and asked him to validate what I just said.
So hold on, let me see if I get this straight. This deputy, can I say this deputy is like reports to you and is a subordinate to you, right?
He's subordinate to me.
And so your senior officer goes to your subordinate to validate your report.
Yes.
Oh yeah. How did that go over?
And he didn't do it to anybody else in the room, just to me. And
that's a tough one.
This was a guy that's very much like, oh, women's equality, women's rights. Like, I'm so supportive, right? And so I went after the meeting. After the meeting, I went to talk to him. I was like, I don't think he meant this, but I want to let him know how I received that.
So you gave him the heads up.
And I told him, I was like, hey, in the meeting, you did this. You went to my subordinate and asked him to validate my update. I'm trying to understand why you did that. Immediately, I didn't do that.
Oh.
I was like, what? There were like 20 people in the room. You totally did it. I mean, I can go grab some more witnesses if you need me to. And I'm not trying to say you did it intentionally. I'm just letting you know that you did that. So
was that a CYA response or was that denial? Like, what was that?
Absolute denial. She's going to go file an equal opportunity complaint on me. And he started preaching to me about, well, if you knew me, you'd know I was not that type of person. And I'm sitting here, I'm like, I didn't say you were any type of person. I just, you had this reaction that was probably unconscious, and I'm not attacking you, and I'm not like angry. I wasn't showing any sort of anger. I think at that point, all I was showing was shock, because I was like, it was literally 5 minutes ago. You could not have forgotten by now. Like, it hasn't been that long. And it took me a while to process what was going on, like what was happening. And it turns out it's that fear of a reverse bias, of a reverse prejudice, that fear that I'm going to complain and their career is going to be impacted.
And I'm going to automatically be found guilty because I'm a white male, blah, 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 right?
Well, and he was an African-American male, so it was even a more interesting dynamic. My own unconscious bias was screaming, like, don't you understand this? Come on, haven't you dealt with this yourself? Right? Like, which wasn't fair to him, but I mean, that was my own unconscious bias, because I'm like, dude, you're Black. You should understand what I'm talking to you about here. Like, come on, we're just trying to be like, comrades here.
And we help each other out here. Like,
right. But it's that fear.
So you know what? That's like a knee-jerk reaction, right? That's like a fear response, right? When the fear response kicks in, the logical brain just goes flying out the window, and you just revert back to your base training, right? And I'm there's a part of me that says, like, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck. And I'm trying to parse, is it because this person let his guard down and his real intentions or his real way of thinking leaked out, or was it like just a mistake? I'm trying to pass judgment, and we can't decide that here, but these are questions like leaders have to ask themselves when they catch themselves in these situations. They got to do that, like that little deep analysis to understand, like, is this how I really, really feel inside? Is this what I really believe? And if it is, like, I got to root that out and do some work on it.
Well, and in the moment, how do you respond as a leader, right? If somebody brings something like that to you, you have to hold that down a little bit for yourself and just listen. Right? Just listen to your people, because whether their perception is an accurate perception or not, and whether your actions are being portrayed accurately or not, it matters less than listening to the person who had the courage enough to come and talk to you about it.
Yeah.
Right.
I think the automatic response that I would recommend to any leader in that situation is just say thank you. I mean, because you're right, it does take a lot of courage to speak truth to power in whatever environment you happen to be in. And even if that person is dead wrong, and you believe that they're dead wrong, you want to find out why they think that you could behave that way, because there's got to be a reason. It's not, people don't just make that stuff up. I mean, okay, yeah, I guess there are some crazies that do, but in general, people in responsible positions don't make that stuff up.
Right. There's always room for growth, and whether it's growth for you as a leader because you made a misstep, or growth that you can now identify for your subordinate, and tools that now you can start turning on. Okay, let me give them these tools to help them in this, future, in a future situation, right? Because obviously they were lacking some tools here. It's growth either side. So just listen, take the input, and your job then as a leader is to figure out, okay, how do you fix it? How do you implement? How do you
there's some damage control that needs to be done.
And just by accepting it, just by listening, that word gets around. So if people didn't like you before, now you're great, right? Because you're willing, you care, you're willing to hear them out, and obviously there's a balance there. You don't just want a free for all, people coming in and saying dumb stuff, right? But I think you can give feedback to make sure that helps, to not let that happen. But
well, it's a coaching opportunity.
Showing that you care about the people. Yeah,
it's a coaching opportunity. Yeah, absolutely, 100%. I agree immensely, and I think it's very important for everybody, so parents, teachers, people in various institutions, when they feel attacked for whatever reason, that's the moment to not attack back, but to step back and not be defensive, but just be open and vulnerable, because that's what's going to really, create that open channel of communication that will allow honesty to come out, hopefully. I mean, it's certainly much better than putting up your dukes and defending yourself, because that rarely gets us anywhere.
No, and that's just going to breed discontent.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. We can go on for hours on this topic. Okay, so you're gonna do this gig, or you are doing it? Like, are you doing it part-time? Like,
so I'm doing it part-time.
How do we learn more about this stuff?
Yeah, so I'm doing it part-time. Right now, really, it's just about kind of building everything up to be able to provide a lot of really good value. So, I joined a collaboration for a triple set of books for businesses on leadership, diversity, and equity. In fact, the first book is out on Amazon.
Well, we'll put a link for that in the notes for sure.
Awesome. Well, and my favorite part about it is all the proceeds from these 3 books go to a nonprofit that supports Homes for Heroes, so military veterans, first responders.
We love that.
And it's just a beautiful collaboration with a lot of great people. We each kind of wrote a chapter, and so it's definitely awesome.
All right, so you got your foot in the water. Everyone I've ever talked to that gets their foot in the publishing, authoring water, they want more. Is there something else in the pipe for you as far as that's concerned?
I do have another one that I'm working on independently, still in the very initial stages, kind of first draft stages. But people can keep up with me on LinkedIn, and they'll see that come out when it's ready.
Nothing like a little bit of social pressure to keep you on your deadlines. Yeah.
Exactly, right? Exactly. And then I've done some speaking engagements. And in fact, I think one of the things that I'm really excited about right now is Dr. Julie Ducharme runs a nonprofit called Combat Boots to Heels.
Oh, yeah.
That helps women, veterans, and male spouses, women affiliated with the military, transition away from the military.
Okay.
And she does a conference multiple times a year called She Talks, and it's kind of a women's empowerment conference. And we are really excited to be bringing that to Hawaii. And
wow. Nice.
So we're building that up here, because not only is there a great military community out here on Oahu, but there's also just a great cultural diversity community that could use some really great women's empowerment, options. There's barriers, there's barriers everywhere. And
Yeah.
so the best way to break them down is to identify them.
Yeah. Yeah. You talk about them, identify them, and try different things, right? If
Right.
the first way doesn't work, doesn't mean, oh, it can't be done. It just means you got to try another way, right?
Yep.
And I think we've seen that over and over again in larger areas of society where they need to deal with that subject, like the civil rights movement, for example, right? There's no
Yeah.
one size fits all solution. It requires a whole bunch of them, right? And to be applied all the time.
Yeah, no, exactly. And with that, my consulting firm, it's called SONUS. It means happiness in Celtic.
Celtic.
Yeah. Well, Irish Norwegian.
I thought you were gonna say like
so.
some Polynesian language and like Celtic, like it just threw me for a loop.
Well, we're still working the name for the local nonprofit here in Hawaii, but
Okay.
we're getting closer.
Okay.
But
All right.
no, SONUS is helping to, put together essentially, consulting, one-on-one training, C-suite
Okay.
trainings, things that leaders can tap into to get more tools for their toolbox, right? To get
Okay.
action steps, because, like we said, when most of the training that's out there is only focusing on the reactive, how do you be proactive? And so
Yeah.
that's what my company is going to bring to the table, is to help identify proactive aspects that leaders can put into, a daily meeting, or just all of their different nuances of whatever their industry is, whatever their business is, to keep the conversations alive, right? To
Yeah.
keep
Even learning how to
growing.
identify your biases and your
Yes.
prejudices, just learning how to identify like the words you're using, the expressions you're using, the facial expressions that you're using, and how you respond to certain, stimulus. Just knowing that is there can make a difference for some people because they just don't know what to look for.
Yeah,
They don't know
no,
how to
exactly.
identify it. So yeah, I think it's amazing. Okay, so we got your website. We're gonna post up your website. Where's the best place for people to find you? Like, is it social media, your website? What's the best way for people to find you?
The best way is LinkedIn.
Okay.
To look for me on LinkedIn, and I can share that little
Oh,
link
I'll
as
put all that
well.
stuff in the notes. It'll be
Yeah,
there. It'll be there.
yeah.
Oh, fantastic. So LinkedIn. All
That's the
right. So
easiest way.
we'll know where to look for you on LinkedIn, and we're not going to put any pressure on you for the book, but I'm hoping we can get you back on the show to announce your book.
Yes,
like in the near
I
future.
look forward to that.
That'd be cool. That'd be cool. Well, thank you so much, Brianna, for being on. You are a breath of fresh air from the perspective of there's a lot of practical stuff that I hear you talking about, and knowing that you've lived it firsthand really adds a lot of authenticity to what you say, and I'm sure it will also come across in your teaching and your coaching work. So bravo for you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we'll see you soon.